hitting it the wrong way,
Is Bill Arndt here somewhere?
and I just really screwed up things.
We're on for 10:30 on Thursday, a week from Thursday. Great. All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The May 20th, 2019 Special Joint City Council and Redevelopment Agency Budget Meeting is called to order. This meeting has been properly noticed and posted in compliance with the open meeting law. These proceedings are being video recorded as well as presented live on KCLV Cable Channel 2 and are closed captioned for hearing impaired viewers. Please note, customers CenturyLink, Cox Communication may view this program in high definition on Channel 1002 and in standard definition on Channel 2. You may also watch this meeting live on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, on the Go Vegas app. This meeting, as well as all other KCLV programming, may be viewed on the internet at www.kclv.tv/live. The proceedings will be rebroadcast KCLV Channel 2 on the web Tuesday of the meeting week at 3 p.m., Thursday at 9 a.m., 7 p.m., and Friday at 4 p.m., Saturday at 6 a.m., and Sunday at 9 p.m. This building is protected by state-of-the-art fire detection suppression sprinkler systems. If alarm should activate during today's meeting, please evacuate using the exit at the back of the chambers going out to the mezzanine. Proceed out the double doors to the terrace and go back down the staircase. For anyone who has difficulty with stairs, please check with the marshal or a fire official for assistance. Once outside, assemble in the northeast corner across the street from City Hall at Lewis and First Streets. Employees wearing safety vests or city marshals will inform you when safe to re-enter the building. For public comment related items on the agenda, citizen participation, public hearing items, we have available a speaker card which you may complete and submit to our city clerk up front. Cards are available online, the clerk's office, or the rear of these chambers. If you do not submit a card, it does not prevent you from speaking under public comment, citizen participation, or specified public hearing items. If anyone's present today who has need for hearing impaired equipment, please see our city clerk staff up front. Please note, if you parked in the parking garage across the street, a new flash parking self-validation machine is located in the foyer between council chambers and the security desk you walk through to enter these chambers. You must have your ticket when you use the machine. If you do not have your ticket, see security personnel when exiting for a validation coupon. Before we proceed with the agenda, would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No feedback from children today. That was so much fun. Okay. So we will move on to agenda item. I'm getting there. 4. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters on the agenda for action. The amount of time any single speaker is allowed may be limited. All comments made will be cross-referenced to those specific items. If anyone submitted a speaker card who wishes to speak under this portion of the agenda, please come to the podium, state your name for the record. This is your opportunity to address the council, but the council is not able to respond or engage in dialogue. We'll set the time at 1 minute. Anyone wishing to come forward? Close public comment. And next, we're going to hear items number 5 through 9. Although we are hearing these items together after the presentation and discussion, we will take separate motions. I'll read them before we begin. Agenda item 5, public hearing and discussion for possible action regarding fiscal year 2020 City of Las Vegas tentative budget and fiscal year 2020 City of Las Vegas final budget, including 5-year capital improvement plan. Agenda item 6, public hearing discussion for possible action regarding fiscal year 2020 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency tentative budget and fiscal year 2020 City of Las Vegas Redevelopment Agency final budget. Number 7, R18-2019, discussion for possible action to adopt by resolution the budget policies upon which the city budgets are based. Number 8, RA3-2019, discussion for possible action to re-adopt by resolution the budget policies upon which the redevelopment agency budgets are based. Number 9, R19-2019, discussion for possible action to approve a resolution to terminate the fiscal stabilization special revenue fund, all wards. Okay, Mr. Adams.
Scott Adams, City Manager. Good morning, Mayor and City Council members. It is my pleasure this morning to present to you the proposed final FY 2020 budget. This budget continues to respond to your priorities as you've identified those over the last couple of years. We also continue to look at our citizens and what they've expressed through the citizen surveys in terms of things that should be placed in the budget, as well as internally on certain issues. We've looked at our employee engagement survey. The emphasis in this budget has been placed on the expansion in certain priority areas and revenue development in those priority areas. Those key priorities that you stated to us, primarily which are public safety and then also homelessness. And of course, you have defined homelessness as a public safety priority. And this was a difficult budget, because I think we identified going in and very early to you, probably over a year ago, that we were looking at a projection of a structural deficit. And so we were able to overcome that structural deficit, at least for 2020, through an early adoption of a vacancy management program. We've been exploring new revenues that would be durable and sustainable over time that we could use to close the gap. And then I think, if you remember, I put in place Team 2020, which is an internal effort that involved a lot of employees throughout the city that developed a lot of ideas for how we could save money in the budget. So all those things put together, it really got us over the finish line. So at this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to Gary Ameling, our Chief Financial Officer, who will give us greater details. Gary?
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. As the City Manager said, I'm Gary Ameling, your Chief Financial Officer. And feel free to stop me at any point during the presentation if you have any questions. I'm going to start with a little high-level overview of the overall city budget and then get into more detail about various aspects of it, but focusing primarily, as we have in the past, on the city's general fund. But before I do that, I'd just like to make sure that we give good recognition to the folks that worked really hard on the budget this year. So thanks to Finance Director Vanessa Appleyard and her staff in the Finance Department who helped put together all of the budgets with respect to this fiscal year, as well as the 5-year forecast, and as well as to all the department heads and their staff who worked tirelessly in putting the budget together that the City Manager reviewed and is recommending for the final budget today. Looking at the budget in terms of its highest level, this is the overall city budget that's being proposed. There's 3 columns on this slide, and this is in the state's required format. So for fiscal year 18, the first column is the actuals for that fiscal year. For fiscal year 19, the estimated year-end expenditures for each of the city's fund categories. And then for fiscal year 20, the budget that we're proposing, which, as you see, if you follow those lines, the numbers down in the column there, $1.8 billion budget for fiscal year 20 is the proposed budget that we're asking you to make a motion on and approve and send to the state today. We added this slide with respect to one of your council priorities to the budget presentation today because it helps I think, define what our current spend is and proposed spend is for fiscal year 20 for our estimated homelessness costs. This is our best estimate of what the city is projected to spend for fiscal year 20. It's $35.1 million out of all city funds. About $29.5 million of that money is coming from the city's general fund, and then CDBG, sanitation fund, and RDA make up the other $5 million or so. And you can see how it plays out in terms of which departments the money is budgeted in. And as the city manager mentioned, in considering this to be a public safety cost, although that's not the way the state requires us to categorize it, it's an additional $35 million that we're spending on homelessness costs that really is a public safety cost that if we could figure out a solution to, that money could be repurposed, or at least part of that money could be repurposed for other things in our budget.
Before you, Mayor,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to stop you on the first page. It won't be happening often. Homelessness, well, they didn't listen to us in Carson City. They gave us the cold shoulder. Chairman Neal from Taxation grabbed the bill, hijacked it, and put in her own essay on the wonderful things that she'd like to do and killed all the money we had coming. And unfortunately, we lost a vote in the Senate, so it's going to go there to the floor and I assume pass. So they didn't hear us, even though we made a wonderful presentation. And I went back and I read Scott's presentation to the first committee in Way Government Affairs, and it was eloquent. And we got rolled really bad. And, we can't forget what's happened here. And this should be a good illustration. I don't know if any press are watching this, but they're not very responsible because they haven't reported this. They just haven't talked about the nuts and bolts and how much homelessness takes away from the rest of our budget and why we needed all that new money, small amount it was, to cope with this. And, because that would have reduced a lot of that. Not just 30, it would have been 6 or 7 million, but it would have had a much greater impact than that because of all this spreading around of the money, 35 million. So I guess I ought to thank staff for trying, and I'm sorry that it couldn't be pushed over. I can't believe none of our city legislators voted for us, not one, although there was one no vote somewhere on the floor in the assembly, April 23rd, I think. But I can't tell you how disappointed I am in what's happened up there. We needed the help and we didn't get it. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Please continue.
So turning our attention now to the city's general fund budget, this first slide gives you an overview of where we think we're going to end for this current fiscal year. We are estimating to be about $17.7 million ahead of budget on the revenue side and about $2.9 million under budget on the expenditure side. In total, a little bit over $20 million, and that is recommended to be spent, some of it towards one-time costs associated with fiscal year 2020 requests, most of it going towards capital improvement projects that otherwise would have to wait and be competing for monies in later years, and then also in line with our reserve policies that we're recommending and going to have a discussion on later in this presentation. For fiscal year 20, our overall revenue assumptions are that the economy is going to continue to be pretty good, continue to be performing pretty well for fiscal year 20, although we will talk in our 5-year forecast about what we're projecting for the future years, which includes a slowdown. Just as a reminder, we've now gone almost as long in this recovery period as the recovery period from from March of 1991 through March of 2001 expansion. Come June will actually be the longest economic expansion since World War II, and most economists are predicting that at some point in the next couple of years, the economy will slow and possibly slip into a recession, but we have not forecasted a recession in our numbers for fiscal year 20. We are forecasting a slowdown in fiscal year 21. Overall, for C-Tax, we're recommending a 5% increase for next fiscal year's budget. For property tax, we have revised estimates from the state and the county of 5.8% increase, and that breaks out into a 9% increase in overall assessed valuation. The tax caps, the 3% and 8% caps that are in place are, again, somewhat constrained by the secondary tax caps. The one that's in play for this coming fiscal year is 2 times the CPI, and since CPI is 2.4% for this last calendar year, the cap on the commercial activity for property tax is 4.8%. That's still a higher number than what we've seen in the last several years, but well below the 8% primary cap on property tax. The amount of abatement continues to grow as the assessed value is growing faster than the tax increase, and so we're estimating $39.2 million of total abatement for next fiscal year. In licenses and franchises, we're expecting a slight decrease. That's primarily because the fiscal year 19 number included some one-time audit monies. In fines and charges for services and other revenues, an increase of 11.2%. That's primarily due to the Medicaid money, which wasn't budgeted in the previous fiscal year. And then the contribution for the redevelopment agency, which the redevelopment agency board acted on and approved a couple of months ago. Overall, looking at the city's general fund revenues and how they categorize in this pie chart, along the bottom and right side of this pie chart are consolidated tax on the right in the blue color, and in the orange color on the bottom left, property taxes. Together, those two primary revenue sources total about over 70% of our general fund resources. They are, however, the two most economically sensitive revenue sources, so as the economy goes and comes around with its economic cycles, those are the categories that can really help us or the categories that can really hurt us during a downturn. Looking at the expenditure side of the proposed budget, our goal was to sustain programs and expand in priority areas of the City Council. We are currently still in collective bargaining with 3 of our 4 major bargaining units, the IAFF, the POA, and the PPA, and we've been giving you updates on the status of those negotiations as they've gone along. We are having to increase our O&M costs for several assets which are being turned back to the city. Cashman Center, Central Library, as well as the Woodlawn Cemetery late next fiscal year. We have realigned the employee benefit fund. We talked about that. We've tried to move more of the actual costs into the funds where the people actually are housed. We have included in the budget full funding for the 3rd group of marshals, so the 3-year plan to add marshals to our Department of Public Safety will be fully implemented and the full year costs reflected in the fiscal year 2020 budget. And then we have included the full staffing for Fire Station 103 as Station 3 completes next fiscal year. The people that have been temporarily relocated to Station 103 will move back to Station 3, and a new cadre of fire staff will go in and staff Fire Station 103. We have included significant contributions to our capital program in fiscal year 20, as well as I mentioned earlier in fiscal year 19. That'll really help with the backlog of capital projects. And in this final budget, as compared to the tentative budget, there's an additional $3.7 million contribution, which Jorge will talk about when he comes up and talks about some of the CIP slides. Overall, we continue to budget a vacancy rate for all city departments of 3% for all departments and 6% in the fire department. We did have some good news between the tentative and the final budget. The Metro budget request decreased by $2.7 million, which from what we had included in the tentative budget, and that's the primary reason why we were able to contribute more monies towards the capital projects for next fiscal year. The primary reason why that decreased, they ended up asking for less in terms of civilian position ads, and their overall more cops budget increased, allowing for more of the extra cops that they wanted to add to go into that funding source instead of into the county and our contributions. And then 12 transfers of positions from the general fund to the sanitation fund, primarily related to downtown sidewalks, storm drain, and cleaning and sanitation programs. And then we have implemented the recommendations of the ICMA studies for both Department of Public Safety and Fire and Rescue, and we'll see that in the position counts in just a few minutes. Between the tentative and the final budget, we went back and we reviewed all of the salary and benefit costs associated with positions that are here currently, as opposed to the ones when we ran the budget numbers back in December. That resulted in a reduction in our salary and benefit costs of about $2.1 million. We did add about $2 million to the budget for one-time costs associated with the city having to take back the operation of the Woodlawn Cemetery. We are hoping to put that out to bid and see if we can find another operator, but by the current contracts requirements, we are required to buy out their inventory and their accounts receivable once we take back the operation of that cemetery. I mentioned the Metro Police Department budget going down by $2.7 million, and then an additional transfer of capital monies of $3.7 million that we're able to add to the final budget. In terms of positions, there are 30 new positions in the general fund, 1 in the city's clerk's office, a records analyst, 8 in the Department of Public Safety, primarily in administrative support, but again, as we've mentioned previously, that frees up the marshals who no longer have to do that administrative work, and so they can spend more of their time in the field, which should really help with patrols and building safety. In the Fire and Rescue Department, there's 18 additional positions, majority of those going towards the Fire Station 103 staffing, and then an additional 5 going towards responses to the ICMA studies. And then in the Operations and Maintenance Department, 2 additional positions, and 1 in Planning, the Historic Preservation Officer, which is supported by the Centennial Commission funding. In the other funds, there's 12.5 positions recommended for addition. 7 of those are recommended in the Sanitation Fund, 2 in Public Works, 2 in Operations and Maintenance, 5 in Operations and Maintenance. And then in the Parking Enterprise Fund, 1 half position supported by fees. And then in Development Funds, Building and Safety Fund, 4 positions to address the increase in development activity. And then 1 in the Internal Service Funds, partially fee supported in Fire Communications area. Overall, as the city manager mentioned, our vacancy management program, there currently is 82 positions that have been frozen in non-critical areas totaling about $8 million in the general fund. That helps offset the new positions. There's 42.5 new positions and restored positions, and they play out as shown in this chart, 30 of those in the general fund, 12.5 of those in other funds. And when you break it out between public safety and non-public safety, 26 additional public safety positions in line with your council priority, and 16.5 non-public safety positions. However, on the right side of the chart, you can see that we include the effect of the frozen positions. The actual number of available staff will be lower by 39.5 positions than what we have this current fiscal year. Looking at how the city's expenditures break out in a pie chart, first by category, you can see that salary and benefit costs are by far the biggest component of our overall general fund expenditure budget. And when you consider the light gray slice along the left side of the chart, which is Metro's budget to be primarily salary and benefit costs as well, a total of about 78% of our budget goes towards staffing. And then you can see that non-labor is about 16.8%, and other, which is where the CIP contribution shows up, is about 1.8%. Looking at it by expenditure function, public safety, of course, continues to be the largest share of our overall expenditure budget. Right about 2/3 goes towards public safety, and that doesn't include about $12 million or so, as shown in the box on the bottom left, that's in other budgets, but was related to the homelessness costs, of which about $29.5 million is our total general fund budget for homeless costs for fiscal year 2020. This table shows you the overall city budget for next fiscal year compared to the actual and estimated year-end spends for fiscal years 18 and 19. The budget for next fiscal year is estimated to be, in the right-hand column, about $620.8 million of revenues, about $615.8 million of expenditures, leaving an excess of $5 million, and that $5 million gets us right to our overall general fund reserve target, which is probably a little small on this chart, but it's 20.2% is our reserve amount for fiscal year 20 based on these estimated revenues and expenditures. As part of our effort every year, we put together a 5-year forecast that takes the budget year and basically projects it forward 5 additional years. That effort includes a very extensive effort to look at each of our individual revenue sources and each of our expenditure categories and project those forward based on best information that we have, both in terms of the economy and what we think was going to happen on our expenditure trends. Looking at this coming fiscal year and the 5 years beyond, we are projecting a slowdown in economic activity to begin in fiscal year 21. And based on that slowdown, we've estimated that our C-tax growth will slow from 5% in fiscal year 20 down to 1.5% in fiscal year 21, and that our property tax growth, which lags a little bit based on the economic activity, will slow from 4.5% down to 2%, and then grow by a slower 4% per year in the out years. What that results in is that we continue to see that there is a slight discrepancy between the average growth rate in revenues and the average growth rate in expenditures. The average growth rate in revenues is about 3.5% per year versus an average expenditure growth rate of about 4.1% per year. That's a difference of about 0.6% per year, which results in about $4 million per year gap. And so when you look at the numbers over time, We think that we'll be okay for fiscal year 20 and 21. In fiscal year 21, that number was slightly red when we saw the version in the tentative budget, but based on the Metro budget going down and some additional property taxes, that number has become slightly green, although probably within the margin of error.
Mr.
but when-
Ameling, if I might just question you, knowing that most of the hotels, looking at World Resorts and Circa, all these new hotel rooms of affecting the C-tax, that's a huge number of rooms coming in, which might affect that up rather than down in 2021 as you slip into 2022. I mean, you're talking 6,000 rooms added.
Most definitely, and so that's one of the reasons why we're not building in a full-on recession into our projections, but rather a slowdown. There is projections from various economists that we will slip into a recession, but the Federal Reserve, through their efforts, is trying to manage what's commonly called a soft landing, so that we actually have a slowdown as opposed to a full-on recession. We don't know the actual outcome, but you're certainly right that the Las Vegas economy is doing very well right now, and those additional hotel units that are under construction, if they don't just rob from the other existing hotels, will bring new visitors into town and generate a lot of excitement, at least for a year or two. And so if that coincides with a national recession or a worldwide recession, that could be softened somewhat, that economic benefit. But certainly we're seeing the benefits right now in terms of construction activity, additional workers that are helping to build all those buildings, generating additional income in our economy, and spending that money, that's what's helping drive up our consolidated tax, and in a couple of years, our property tax revenues.
Okay.
So it's a very exciting time, but we're keeping an eye on it because we're not quite sure how it's going to play out. But certainly for the long-term future, it's a very healthy thing. So this chart, just to conclude, does include the effect of the frozen positions. So the frozen positions are targeted to increase to $10 million in fiscal year 20. So by the time we get into fiscal year 21 through 25, there's an assumed $10 million of ongoing savings associated with those frozen positions. And that does help a lot. And so if you looked at it without those frozen positions, on this following chart, you would see that we would be in a deficit position every year, including the budget year of fiscal year 20 and the projected year for fiscal year 21. Both of those would be red instead of green as shown on the prior chart. So it really is important that we continue to manage those positions in a smart way. We put this slide in to just kind of conclude about what some of our risks and uncertainties are associated with the budget. As we mentioned, we currently have a gap in funding for homeless funding. We're looking at various revenue alternatives, but that's still something that we're working on. The legislature is still in session. There's several bills out there that you've been getting updates on that have significant fiscal impact for us. A couple of them are positive, but most of them tend to be negative fiscal impacts, so we're keeping a close eye on those. We are still open with respect to 3 of our collective bargaining agreements, and we don't have the outcomes for those. We have, in fact, reached impasse with 2 of the 3 units. Still hopeful that there might be some settlement, but that is still an uncertainty in our budget. We do not know the timing and severity of the economic slowdown. We're hopeful that it'll be a soft landing as opposed to a recession, but as we just discussed, there's various opinions about that, and what's happening nationally and internationally outside of our region can certainly impact that. The impact on consolidated tax with respect to construction activity, it certainly is boosting it because of the development activity right now. There's lots of expenditures going on to build those big towers. That is helping with our C-tax revenues. We did assume in our budget that the Medicaid monies that we started receiving last fiscal year will continue through the forecast period. So if there is a difference in how that actually plays out, that would be a major impact to our budget position. We do have some outstanding litigation issues, and although we are doing our best to try to mitigate the impact of our frozen positions, there is some impact that we're having to try to manage our way through and do the best that we can. And with that, I'm going to turn over the next several slides to Jorge Cervantes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Jorge Cervantes, Chief Operation Development Officer. Thank you. I had to think about that one for a while. So in putting together your capital program, we use a variety of funding sources to do that. And some of these funding sources have certain restrictions, and they're listed here, those that do have restrictions. But there's also other funding sources that are a little more flexible and don't have those restrictions. And you can see some here. Some of it's reallocation of funds as we close out projects from previous years. We're able to roll that money forward and use them for new projects. Some is a general fund transfer that Gary alluded to earlier from fiscal year 19. As we close out the year, whatever fund balance left over, we move it forward to see what we can fund for the following year, as well as some money that was allocated in fiscal year 20 budget, which was the $5 million for capital, as well as the 3.7 that was realized because of savings in the Metro budget and other savings. And then the Medicare reimbursement that Gary referred to, this is from a previous year, from fiscal year 18, that we barely received this year, that we're able to allocate, and we're allocating the majority of this toward the public safety side, and you'll see that in the listing of projects. Some of the major projects that we're proposing to fund this year include about $9 million worth of fire service apparatus and equipment. As you know, fire trucks need to be replaced every year as they get older in their life cycle, and so we'll replace some of those, as well as some of the life safety equipment they need to be able to respond to these emergency calls. There's about $4.5 million that's going toward the courtyard project to continue and finish off that project so we can complete it all in one single phase instead of multiple phases. And then last year, you all approved the funding for bond issuance for the downtown courthouse, and that courthouse is going to start construction in a couple of months here, but we need to set the money aside for the furnishing, fixture, and equipment, as well as the technology that goes in there and some of the security components with it. And then some money we're putting aside for strategic land acquisition as those opportunities may arise throughout the year. We want to have reserve to be able to move quickly on those if those opportunities do arise. So for fiscal year 20, there's a total of about $45 million in general fund money that's available for programming. Now, this doesn't include some of the funding sources that comes from other funding sources, regional funding sources, such as the Regional Transportation Commission, Regional Flood Control District, NDOT, and some of you sit on these regional boards that allocate the money. The reality is the majority of our capital program is really funded by these regional agencies, and you, through those boards, allocate and give direction to where that money's allocated. But if we look at the allocation in the capital program, by funding category on the general fund side, you see that 16.4 is going toward public safety, about 14.5 goes to city facilities, and that's just trying to maintain our current assets and our current facilities to make sure they're in good operational shape, again, as they reach the end of their life cycle, make sure that we're able to keep those going for a longer period of time. About $6.8 million goes to recreational facilities, and this includes the residential construction tax that's allocated by ward that you, throughout the year, you all give direction on what you want to spend that money on, as well as technology, keeping up to date with some of our software to make sure that there's no threats to our systems, and then some into road and flood and others, for a total of 69 projects that we're recommending for fiscal year 20 under your capital program. So when we roll these 69 projects with the projects that carry over from previous years, as well as the regional projects, our capital program for the next 5 years is about $1.1 billion. And again, the bulk of that funding comes from those regional agencies that provide that money for that program. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary for the Redevelopment Agency.
Thank you, Jorge. So the next couple of slides look at our redevelopment agency budget in terms of fiscal trends.
I'm sorry, Gary, may I interrupt you for just a
sure.
second? Thank you, Mayor. I didn't see, I know that in the printed budget, we have a note, and this is a minor thing, but it's on Parks and Recreation. We've got like a declining revenue from the municipal golf course, and I don't know if that can be related to anything in particular from year to year. But I'm just curious where the revenue or lack of would be from our operations over at Desert Pines. We have a contractor there too, don't we? Same sort of setup, or is it completely different? Because I don't see a number related to results at Desert Pines. I want to make sure that our golf courses are doing something. The fact that we only lost $500,000 or something like that is good. No, I guess we're estimating to lose $870,000 this year on page 90 of the handout that I got. So that's in Schedule F1. Question, I guess, is just where is Desert Pines? And that's all. If you can't get me the answer now, I appreciate it later.
We will get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you.
And could I ask also on this redevelopment agency list, is there any financial obligation or anything with the opportunity zones that's not listed here? I didn't know if there's any impact at all as we go forward into opportunity zone development.
I'm going to ask Mr. Arnett to come up and speak to opportunity zones.
Okay, thank you. And I just was curious that it isn't listed. And there may well be a reason, and he'll know it.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. Bill Arntz, Director, Economic and Urban Development. The Opportunity Zones is a federal income tax benefit to actually, let me back up, I'm sorry. The Opportunity Zone is a benefit for investors who might have a capital gains tax liability at the federal level to shield that and have a deferral of that capital gains tax for up to 7 years, and then also have a permanent exclusion of future capital gains tax after 10 years if they make an investment in a qualified opportunity zone. So there's no direct fiscal impact to the city's budget or the redevelopment agency budget. We believe there will be a benefit if, as investment is made in these zones, it will generate new development, new property tax, so that could be a revenue benefit to the agency or potentially to the city. But it's not money flowing through the city, it's really money flowing private to private, and then there's a benefit at the federal tax level. When investors file their taxes, they can shield some of their investments from capital gains.
But Mr. Arndt, isn't there somebody for the city, either in finance or in the RDA, that is monitoring, that is a full-time employee, that is the go-to person, therefore will be impacting somehow our budget?
Absolutely. So we are monitoring that in our office. I myself am monitoring it as well as our Deputy Director, Jason Thompson, and our Redevelopment Manager, Tara Anderson. The three of us, for instance, were at a all-day conference at Mandalay Bay Expo Center just a week ago Friday. We are tracking investments in the city. We're working on an online portal that should be launched soon. We are aware that one investment in Opportunity Zones has closed in Symphony Park, the Aspen Heights project. That's one of our 2 new housing projects in Symphony Park, closed on a $26 million Opportunity Fund investment. So that's capital coming into that project. So we're going to be tracking this and track the impact that it has on the city as well as on a budget perspective, and we'll certainly keep Mr. Ameling and Vanessa Appleyard, our finance director, informed as well as we make progress.
Okay. I just figured there might be an economic impact on the city as we monitor, get involved in it. I mean, somebody's got to be inspecting what this whole opportunity zone is, which then takes you away from other work that you're doing, or you have to hire somebody else who does nothing but monitor this. So it's just a question knowing it wasn't listed here.
Yeah, I think the way to, again, for the record, Bill Arndt, Mayor, I think the way to think of it, and this is maybe oversimplifying it, but the way to think of it is this is another source of capital, a source of money to come into projects in the city in these targeted areas. And to the extent we're successful in getting the money into these areas, that'll have a beneficial impact, particularly on the property tax side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So looking at the revenues that support the RDA, primarily the tax increment financing based on property taxes, the assessed value continues to increase at a fairly healthy clip. Projected for fiscal year 20 is a 6.1% increase in tax increment. In assessed valuation, which results in a 7.5% increase in tax increment. We continue to see the Smith Center pay back the $20 million note. There's $5 million that's projected to come in June 30th, 2020. We're continuing to market the medical district. Symphony Park development continues. There's a couple of exciting projects breaking ground shortly. The office tenant incentive program continues to be a positive program for us. We're still hopeful that there will be additional allocations for new market tax credits. We continue to see the RDA support the general fund for maintenance in RDA areas. The council previously approved the $1.9 million budget for next fiscal year that's shown on this slide. We continue to see the contributions towards Fremont Street Experience, both in terms of debt issuance and cash contribution from the LVCVA. The Canopy project is slated to open at the end of this calendar year in time for New Year's Eve. City Hall development, the RDA is contributing $4 million towards the acquisition of land. And then the Innovation Center, Smart City Innovation in the Bank of America building, and the Fifth Street School. In terms of the numbers in the budget for the RDA RDA's revenue is estimated to be $28.6 million next fiscal year. That does include contributions from the LVCVA and FSE towards the debt service payments for the bonds that we issued for the Canopy project. On the expenditure side, the budget is estimated to be $44.7 million. A large component of that is the actual expenditure towards that Canopy project, which is shown in the program expense line of $22.6 million. The last section of my presentation has to do with the budget policies, and as we mentioned in the tentative budget, and again in your council briefings, as part of our due diligence on the budget, we reviewed a copy of our council-approved budget policies, which were last approved by resolution in fiscal year 2014. The Government Finances Officer Association does provide us some good guidance with respect to appropriate reserve targets. Their suggestions are that the reserve targets should take into account the unique nature of each governmental entity, as well as the local economy, how vulnerable it is to natural disasters and economic volatility in setting those reserve targets. And so when looking at that guidance and looking at our previously approved reserve targets, we actually came up with several recommendations that we think will bring our reserve targets in line with best practices.
Excuse me, Gary, could I ask a question?
Sure.
Haven't we had a problem in the past when the legislature looked at our reserve fund and then decided monies that we requested, say for homeless, for anything, they felt we could take out of our reserve fund because it was larger?
I'm not sure how long ago you're asking about, but currently in the legislature, there's a bill that actually restricts the amount of general fund reserves that can be protected with respect to negotiations. And so that's one of the bills that we're keeping a close eye on, because I believe it has 16-point-something% in terms of a cap on what can be protected in the general fund reserves with respect to negotiations.
So that would be someplace between what we have now and what our goal is, if it's 16.6.
Yeah, so
I just know there were several times over the past few years that the legislature knocked us out in providing money for us because they said our reserve was plentiful.
Scott Adams, City Manager, through the mayor. Back in the recession, there was some concern about the legislature rating our fund balances and actually capturing some of those fund balances for state use, but there has been a subsequent Supreme Court decision that gave us some protection over that issue. So I think our bigger concern is what Gary has referenced, which is what portion of the fund balance could be technically used in collective bargaining discussions for calculating our ability to pay.
So with respect to the general funds reserve, our previous target had been a 12% fund balance reserve target with a 20% aspirational goal. And then in addition to that, the city had put aside a separate fund, the Fiscal Stabilization Fund, with its own separate 10% goal. And you'll hear in a moment our recommendation to dissolve that Fiscal Stabilization Fund. Our recommendation on the general fund is that based on the type of economy that we have here locally, that it makes sense for the city to have a 20% general fund reserve policy. And so we're recommending that you change the reserve policy from 12% plus a 20% aspirational goal to a straight 20% reserve target. For each of these sections, we've included the current status related to the current general fund reserve language, and then how we would stand related to the new language. And in each case, we're actually projected to be at or above the reserve target based on this new reserve language that we're proposing. The second fund that we're recommending a change to is the Reimbursable Expenses Fund. This is the fund that basically the RDA reimburses the city's general fund for its services. A minor change here, the previous policy was 10% of operating expenses plus 25% of capital. We're recommending that that be changed to 1 month of expenditures, which each month is roughly about 8.6% or so. And we are, again, already at that target. The Automotive Internal Services Fund has basically two major components. One is the operations and maintenance of our vehicle fleet, and the other is the replacement of our fleet. For the operations side, we're recommending a 10% reserve target, and on the replacement side, we're recommending that we have 2 years in reserve to handle the spikes and dips in the replacement schedules for our city's fleet of vehicles. In the Employee Benefits Internal Service Fund, the previous target had been a 25% of operating expenditures policy, which I think was probably a little bit more than we needed. Our recommendation is that we reduce that to 10% of expenditures, plus one of the components of that fund is our workers' compensation program, and for that component, we're recommending that the reserve be equal to 2 times the average of the last 5 years of workers' compensation claim payments. For the Liability Insurance and Property Damage Internal Service Fund, our previous target was 10% of operating expenditures plus 25% of capital expenditures, and our recommendation is we change it similarly to the Benefits Fund to be 10% of expenditures plus 2 times the average of the last 5 years of claims paid. I mentioned the Fiscal Stabilization Fund. That fund was created during the Great Recession with a target of 10%. And several of the monies that were put into that fund have been used previously, but that fund balance has been maintained since 2013, the last 6 years, at a $13 million fund balance. We are recommending that since the general fund is now at the 20% target, that we close that fund and repurpose the balance to put towards capital needs and to create a sinking fund that can help pre-fund certain types of services in years that we're projecting deficits. Is there any questions about the reserve target changes? Okay, so our next step for the budget, after you approve the budget that we're recommending today with any changes that you see fit, we're required by state law to file the final budget by June 1st and to file the CIP budget by August 1st. And with that, I'll turn it back to the city manager.
Scott Adams, City Manager. To summarize, we have a list here of key budget takeaways. We continue to experience our revenue growth not keeping pace with our expenditure growth, causing a structural deficit in our 5-year forecast. As Gary had previously mentioned, our average revenue growth rate is 3.5%, but our expenditure growth rate is projected to be about 4.1%. So that's something we're going to be constantly working on, and in our collective bargaining agreements, and all of our cost structures to bring those in line and look for new revenue opportunities to bring the revenues up as well. We've expanded in priority areas of public safety, metro, marshals for parks, security, and mobile integrated healthcare. And as we've previously stated, while homelessness represents a significant part of our budget, we still have the growth in terms of the need for homeless funding unfunded. And so we are continuing to explore revenue alternatives to meet that growth rate in terms of what we're actually experiencing on the street in homelessness. Our Team 2020 effort addressed our structural deficit, and we've closed the gap, not only for this year, but as we look forward to next fiscal year, we think we're probably in pretty decent shape there as well. And we did that through vacancy management. Vacancy management has been the one area where we got onto that probably a year ago. We've been managing the outflow of employees, the attrition, through primarily retirement. And I think I've indicated to you previously, as we go forward now, we're going to be able to start swapping vacancy in the pool into areas so we can start filling positions in those areas that you've told us are your critical needs. So as we move forward and experience more vacancies, we're going to be able to fill in the areas of public safety, operations, and maintenance, and some of those areas that you've expressed concern about service levels in. And then when we've had surpluses, we've been using those one-time monies for meeting our capital needs, and Jorge went over a summary of our capital needs. So with that, that is the proposed final FY 2020 budget.
Any comments, questions from council? So we would like to do this one at a time?
Yes, please.
Okay. So if I can find out where I'm to be here, hold one sec, please. We will start with agenda item 5. Okay. Agenda item 5 and 6 are both public hearing items. So anybody who wishes to comment on agenda item 5, please come forward, state your name for the record. Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing, and I'm going to ask Mayor Pro Tem to make a motion to approve agenda item number 5.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve agenda item number 5.
Thank you very much. There's a motion, please, woo. There's a motion, here we go. Please vote and please post. He doesn't, you have to go to the meeting.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I've got to vote me aye so I don't delay it.
Okay, and Councilman Creer? There he is. And please post. You see that little worm up there going round and round and round and round. Hypnotic. All right, well, that...
That passed unanimously,
Thank you.
although it didn't post on the video. I apologize.
Okay, thank you, and we'll move on to agenda item 6, public hearing. Anyone wishing to be heard on agenda item 6, please come forward. Hearing and seeing none, I'll close public hearing on agenda item 6 and turn to Mayor Pro Tem for a motion, please.
Madam Mayor, I move to approve item 6.
Thank you very much. Let's try this again.
And I
Okay,
vote aye.
please vote.
Kaufman votes aye.
Okay, and please, there it is, miracle of miracles, it worked. There we go, thank you. And now we'll move on to agenda item 7. Mayor Pro Tem, please, a motion.
Mayor, I move that we adopt by resolution the budget policies upon which the city budgets are based.
Thank you very much. There's a motion to approve agenda item 7. Please vote and please post.
Kaufman votes aye.
And that motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to agenda item 8. Mayor Pro Tem.
I move that we approve the readoption by resolution of the budget policies upon which the redevelopment agency budgets are based.
Wonderful. There's a motion to approve on agenda item 8. Please vote and please post.
Kaufman votes aye. Well, I don't know.
And motion carries. And let's go then on to agenda item 9, which is our final item.
Don't laugh at the old man, you know? Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem, if you would, on agenda item 9.
I move to approve the resolution to terminate the fiscal stabilization special revenue fund.
Thank you. There's a motion on agenda item 9. Please vote and please post.
Aye.
And that motion carries. Thank you. And, okay, and now we'll move on to agenda item 10. Okay, citizen participation. Public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the, God bless you, jurisdiction of the city council. No subject may be acted upon by the city council unless subject is on the agenda scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, come to the podium, please. Give your name for the record. The amount of discussion in any single subject, as well as the amount of time any single speaker is allowed, may be limited. This is your opportunity to address the council, but the council is not able to respond or engage in dialogue. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak under this portion of the agenda? Hearing and seeing none, I shall close that, and thank you all. This meeting is now adjourned.